Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Now, a landmark summit at the White House this week brought the leaders of 5 Central Asian nations together with President Trump, with mineral extraction, regional influence, and shifts in Moscow's traditional sphere of control all on the table. Joining us now on TVP World to unpack what's really at stake is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Post, whose deep expertise on the geopolitics of Eurasia gives him a compelling vantage point for this discussion. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Great to be back in Warsaw. I'm straight off the train from Kyiv.
Really appreciate you coming in. Now, can you help us understand how we should be interpreting this U.S. decision to bring Kazakhstan and other 4 Central Asian presidents to Washington at this time? What appears to be the aim driving the summit?
On the surface, the aim seems to be more economic. Trump's team, they want not only access to mineral wealth that these countries have, as they've wanted in the case of Ukraine. They've also want, the supply chains to be bolstered up, so it's not just, the Chinese or the Russians dominating. But the bottom line is that there is also an important play for influence by the U.S. to restore its influence, hasn't been there for a long time, in an area, in a region traditionally dominated by Russia, but increasingly by China. Yeah. And remember that this meeting takes place after Trump's visits to Seoul, to Tokyo, to Manila. There's a big sort of pitch towards Asia. Let's be friends, let's rethink relations, particularly economic relations. But the bottom line is let's reduce Russian influence and to some extent Chinese, though it's a factor, meaning if we, U.S., can agree with the Chinese, then we can sort of divide the world between us and let the Russians stay out of it. But for the moment, this gives you, Central Asians, a chance to reappear on the world stage, become more important trading partners with us, and to reduce your dependence on Moscow.
Right. So if influence being one of the key topics of these meetings, does it make Kazakhstan's participation especially noteworthy, given that it does have a historical relationship with Russia?
Look, Kazakhstan is by far the biggest of these stands, right, in Central Asia. And as I noted before I came on air, it accounts for 90% of U.S. exports from the region. So, it's by far the most important player. And it's also strategically the most important. It has a Russian minority up in the north that the Russians sometimes talk about as like the Donbass in Ukraine, it should be returned to Russia. So the threat has always been there and is sometimes, resurrected. Even Solzhenitsyn wrote about it way back when, that when how should Russia be rebuilt with eastern Ukraine and with northern Kazakhstan. Mm-hmm. But the leader of Kazakhstan has shown himself to be, I wouldn't say a loyal ally, I would say a reliable ally in terms of politeness towards Moscow. But he's also put Putin in his place. Remember that scene about a year ago when Putin came to Astana and the Kazakh leader started speaking in Russian, which really knocked them off their seats because you speak in Russian to Russians when they come. For the Kazakhs and the other stands, there's also this element of, decolonization. It's still there. They've been very much linked to Moscow, and Moscow has still treated them as if they're not just former domains, but that they are our dependents, something like Belarus too. So I think it's important that the Americans have made this move. We may criticize Trump on any number of counts, domestic and foreign policy, but I think this is a smart move, whoever is directing it from within his camp, because it does really embarrass Moscow. It also makes China think, look, maybe it's worthwhile to sort of be friends and do business with the states rather than have them as an enemy. And it also gives these stands that have been reduced to relative obscurity and dependence on Moscow, a chance to sort of be themselves again. Remember also that Trump has done this not only in relation to the stans, he's done this in relation to Azerbaijan, for example, another Muslim, supposedly theoretically Muslim country. And I think also what is important here that he's managed to drag out Kazakhstan into the Abrams Accord, which is linked to Israel. It's sort of trying to get a more moderate approach to Israel. And we've got forthcoming, I think, on the 18th, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to kind of, shall we say, crown, I'm sorry for repeating myself, to crown the process by meeting also in Washington with Trump. So whereas we're focused on Europe, Ukraine, America's attitude towards an approach to Europe, this is a very important development.
So it does sound like a very brilliant geopolitical chess play. Now, there's one kind of term that I've been hearing a lot more in the media cycle, just surfacing in the past couple of months, and I'm always so curious whether or not this has anything to play with it. One of the things that topped the agenda of these meetings is supposedly the rare earth minerals. Now, my question is, do you think that this is more economic, or is just a headline for more broader influence shaping?
It's both. I think for Trump, it's primarily economic and trade. I mean, he's a businessman. He's a deal maker. And just as he put pressure on Ukraine, the good news for Ukraine is that it's not just Ukraine that has been treated by the new White House in this way. He's extended this approach to, you give us access to your mineral wealth, we need it in America for the future, and in return we'll not only be friends with you, but for example at the moment they're offering airplanes, things like this, saying you don't have to be dependent on Moscow, we'll give you the latest technology and maybe not know-how, but equipment that you need to modernize your countries. This is your chance to step out of the mold, as it were.
Right. So do you think that this is a turning point, a pivoting point for these Central Asian countries to really kind of recalibrate the alignment, be it Russia, be it China, or the United States?
Very much so. Okay, for Kazakhstan, it's not going to change things. China is a major player, but it will reduce the dependence without the Kazakhs actually having to declare this. De facto, it has changed the status quo. And as I've said at the very outset, I'm sure that in Moscow they're very angry at this and very disappointed. You know, it's not just Trump talking about Tomahawk missiles or whatever, but the fact that he's dared to invite the 5 leaders of the former Soviet colonies, if you want, not just states, to Washington, and they came, just as was the case with Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is a major blow for the prestige and pride of Moscow. How do you sell this to your domestic audience?
Right. Now, I find it curious as well because, like you said, Russia's not going to take this very lightly. And, well, when we traditionally think about these stands, they're always kind of walking a tightrope between Chinese influence and that of Russia. There's always a little bit of tug-of-war there. Now, with the U.S. now getting involved, do you think that stronger ties with the U.S. would actually make these countries face more kind of scrutiny pressure under Russia and China? Do you think any retaliation or anything might happen?
Russia will attempt in the at the outset to make its anger known, but there's very little they can do. You know, there is very little they can do. China can do a lot more in terms of economic clout and, you know, arm twisting behind the scenes. But there are other players involved in that area. For example, if Trump were eventually to heal relations with India, that would be game, set, and match. Russia would be left out of the equation. The old setup would be gone. I'm not saying overnight, right, but over a few years. And if a kind of modus vivendi, an arrangement is made with China, again, this is the overarching element, the factor. If that can be done, if Trump and Xi can pursue what they managed to achieve in their talks recently, that would also change the geopolitical setting.
All right. Well, for President Trump, do you think this engagement will bring any concrete win, like domestically? Because for perhaps the domestic crowd, all these kind of geopolitics isn't as kind of readily understandable. So I can assume that he also wants something to deliver to his own base as well.
Look, in the short term, I don't think this is going to have much impact because the stands are not of much interest, let's be frank, to the U.S. public. Mm-hmm. Whereas increasingly, not only the Epstein cases, but the scandals around the White House, and now the setbacks, the New York mayor election results and all of this. Trump is under siege. And even Bannon was saying overnight that, remember, if in the midterms the Republicans lose, some of us, including me, will be going to prison. I mean, this is harsh talk. And I think the attention is going to be increasingly focused on domestic issues. Mm-hmm. What Trump would like to show, as he brags, that he's the great peacemaker, it's 8, 9, 10 conflicts that he's now solved but will anybody listen at home? I don't know. Mm-hmm. The wise people, the policymakers and the potential, those who are going to be there for the long term, not just for today, they are probably pleased with this element of his foreign policy, but there are also many shortcomings.
Yeah, so can you help us tally out the points? Like you mentioned, there's several different aspects of Washington's foreign policy. How does this factor into all of this? And coming from a Ukrainian perspective, do you think that having Russians having less control over the area will in some way benefit Ukraine as well?
Of course. Ukrainians are very happy, and implicitly they are happy that Kazakhstan in particular, less so the others, have shown themselves not to be docile in the way that Lukashenko and Belarus to the north are, that the leader of Kazakhstan has stood up for Kazakhstan's sovereignty and independence. So that is very important. And I think the other factor here is, I've mentioned India, there's Turkey. Remember, Muslim countries, and in the early 90s, Turkey projected itself eastward into the stands. They've got Turkic-speaking based languages, and Turkey also feels that it has an influence there. So also, if Turkey plays along now, somehow finds a modus vivendi of a better sort with not only Brussels, but in particular Washington, it really is a game changer. And therefore, I think that the others, the Tajikistans, the Uzbekistans, they'll be forced to play along. Mm-hmm. Remember, for China and for India, the old Silk Route, but now, transfer of technologies, products, etc., is important. And they don't want Russia to just dominate this and turn the tap on and off, as they used to do with oil and gas coming to Europe. So they are looking for other ways to bypass this. And for them, obviously, it's potentially going to boost their economic potential, production potential, etc., and to get them better recognized in the world.
Right. It's amazing how this might just seem like a meeting with the foreign leaders on a surface level, but behind the scenes we're seeing so many kind of geopolitical chess pieces being kind of set up in a different way that we might expect going forward. Last but not least, we got a little bit of time, but I still want to pick your brains on it for the coming days. What are some of the things that we can be watching out for to see whether or not this leads to any real concrete changes?
Well, if we move away from Central Asia, there's always the China-Taiwan factor. We never know what might happen there, but it seems that at least the threat of a potential confrontation, military confrontation, is on hold. That America and Europe have made it clear, maybe. I think what's very important right now is to see what's going to happen in Europe in terms of delivery of long-range missiles, whether the Germans will give Tomahawks that the Americans are reluctant to give, and Taurus missiles. What's going to happen to the seized assets from the Russian State Bank? Will this be used to help Ukraine's war effort, to fund it? Will Belgium's opposition be overcome? And we today we need to know this. In fact, they're meeting to discuss this. But I think for everybody, what is important is what is happening in Washington itself. To what extent is this White House leadership centered on one figure, is it going to hold? Right. Because it's not just Epstein now. The cracks are appearing. The government closed down. Right. The lack of funding for the population, etc. We're close to a very sort of explosive situation.
Right, pivotal point right here. But thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us. Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.